All right, well, welcome back from lunch. Hopefully you had good sessions with your plenary track speakers. I am excited to introduce Andrei Ostrovsky. He was Chief Medical Officer at CMS, and we had him, say 5 years ago, 6 years ago as a speaker while he was still under his bureaucratic hat and didn't quite have the flexibility to be as vibrant as he is. And so he is now in a really interesting social innovation ventures hat and can speak to us with freedom. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him, and I think you all will be in for a treat. So Andrei.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all. I hope lunch was good. I want to encourage you all, if you want to be able to see fine print, and there will be a few slides with fine print, to move up as close as possible. We will share out the slides afterwards in the form of a PDF, but if you want to be able to consume some nuanced data, come on up. We've got space in the front. And also, I wanted to, before I begin, just get a little bit of a pulse of the audience in terms of the type of work you typically do on a day-to-day basis. So maybe I'll start off with, by raise of hands, could you guys let me know who in here is a provider? All right, I'm seeing probably at least 50% of the crowd. Thank you so much. How about anyone here work in the payer space in some capacity? With an insurance company, carrier? Okay, the payers are still eating, cool. Lots of great, terrible jokes coming up, so hang tight. How about anyone that is currently or has been a patient? Okay, well, for those of you that haven't, congratulations, you will get there. And I hope it's a smooth road. And I think for the rest of us, we can empathize with one another. Anyone work in government? Currently work in government? All right, hi. Hey, guys. How you doing? Got a few. And then for those, how about who has ever worked in government, past or present? Congratulations for getting out. No, I'm kidding. Thank you for your service. I am very grateful, and especially thank you guys for continuing to do what you do. Cool. Anyone, maybe we'll do one more. Anyone here coach or play basketball? All right, that's my hobby. Now you know a little bit about me. Cool. Thank you guys for that. I have a little bit of sense now where we're going. So today, for the next 50 minutes or so, I wanted to run you all through the digital transformation themes that are happening in the space, what I'm seeing as an investor, and what are some best practices that I've noticed that seem to be working for me as an investor, but also that it may be good threshold criteria or vetting criteria for those of you that are providers. And I think also in the government side, it may be helpful as a lens to apply to all the noise out there of these telehealth or digital health or digital therapeutic solutions that I'm sure are bombarding you left and right. And for consumers, I'd love to get your perspective afterwards to see to what extent this is helpful. I always try to put things through the lens of a consumer, but I think this is going to be largely provider focused. And just a little bit more on my background, I did come in the Obama administration to help lead the Center for Medicaid and CHIP Services, so the National Medicaid Program as the Chief Medical Officer. Stuck around for a year under Trump, which was a really interesting exercise in playing defense. Leaked a lot of information to the Washington Post, so now I know how to do that exceptionally well. And I was grateful for the learning and the advocacy opportunity that I did have. I also had a different role in government in the past. I worked for Senator Cardin as a speechwriter back in 2010. But my core skill set is building companies. I've founded a company over a decade ago, which we sold in 2016. Also took over a series of methadone clinics after my most recent government role and helped turn that company around, entirely Medicaid reimbursed business, no tech whatsoever. Boring old services, but obviously critical services that were life-saving. And that was just such an eye-opening experience. So I come from a lens of an operator who has had the fortune to sell a few companies, and for the past several years have been investing in great diverse founders, which you guys will hear about in a moment. take everything I say with a grain of salt. I have a financial interest in 28 companies, well, sold a few now. So just keep that in mind. Having said that, I will try to apply clinical rigor to everything I share. And I am a pediatrician clinically. I do doctor at Children's National in DC, not representing them here at all. So don't tweet at that, or you can tweet whatever you want, I don't really care. But patients are really what motivate me, and equitable outcomes for patients. All right, 3 objectives today. One is I want to give you all a flavor of some of the tailwinds that are happening around this topic of so-called bottom of the pyramid. I'll define that in a moment. Essentially helping to close health equity gaps. The second is I want to highlight some promising practices that I've observed in investing in companies, and I think this is applicable, as I mentioned, to you all as providers and possibly as government folks as well. And then I wanted to kind of show you how I'm walking the talk and show my own financials, like how is my fund performing based on the best practices that I'm highlighting. So in terms of tailwinds, we have all lived through, and congratulations for actually living through COVID. I'm so glad that we're here in person, and I'm so glad that you all are safe and healthy. Having said that, there have been profound, not just mortality, but the disparities in mortality. And has anyone seen these data before from the CDC in terms of the disparities in life expectancy? Okay, I'm seeing some heads nodding. Just to underscore, we've seen a almost 1-year reduction in life expectancy. That is enormous nationwide. But if you look at non-Hispanic Black males, that's a 3-year reduction in life expectancy for an entire subpopulation. And so while the preceding slide is terrifying, 1 million deaths or approaching 1 million deaths from COVID, if we segment where those deaths are occurring in the highest frequency, there's enormous health disparities. The disparities aren't just in mortality, it's also clinical morbidity, but also non-clinical morbidity. Social determinants of health, notably employment, was a huge gap. We all saw and terrifyingly lived through this experience where unemployment shot through the roof. Now it's come down and gotten better. However, it hasn't gotten better equitably. Has anyone ever seen this or heard of this so-called K-shaped recovery? By raise of hands if you've heard or seen it. Okay, a few folks have. Basically, fancy economist talk for some folks got reemployed and reemployed really nicely, and then a lot of folks didn't. And if we look at the breakdown, the yellow line here represents higher paying jobs. So folks that have a $28 an hour or more job, and then the green line represents $16 to $28 an hour, and then the purple line represented $16 or less an hour. And now this is during early days of when COVID started, but the disparities persist in these and then even more profound ways. So it's not just mortality and clinical morbidity disparities, it's also upstream health determinants. And I'll get to non-employment health determinants as well. So to the term bottom of the pyramid. Professor Prahalad out of University of Chicago coined this term in an article and then ultimately a book that he wrote in the early 2000s. And what he's describing here is at the top of the pyramid is purchasing power. Folks that are wealthy, folks that can go out and buy some fancy app or buy some fancy technology or just buy stuff in general. They can afford discretionary spending. But as you move lower and lower to the bottom of the pyramid, which is more and more of the population, they don't have that discretionary money. They don't have an extra few bucks to go spend on some digital health app to go help you find calm and peace. They're hungry. They need to feed themselves and pay for that. They need to pay for housing. They need to pay for so many other things. They're just basic necessities. And so this notion that Professor Prahalad pointed out is that innovators, entrepreneurs, investors, they can focus on the top of the pyramid and get reasonable unit economics because people will pay a lot of money. Or you can look at the bottom of the pyramid where there's a huge number of people, the majority of the people actually, the middle and the bottom of the pyramid. And while they may not individually be able to pay, someone else could pay for value that's being created for that consumer, i.e. Medicaid, Medicare, carriers that are intermediaries in administering safety net programs, things along those lines. And so there is a really unique opportunity to close health equity gaps by focusing on the bottom of the pyramid. It's harder work, it's more complex, it's not just some direct-to-consumer buy a Facebook ad and all of a sudden people come in and you can, sell ADHD medicine or Cialis online. It's a little bit more complex than that, but you know what? Good things are worth fighting for. And the same thing applies for business model creation. I wanted to juxtapose where a lot of innovation has already started to happen in the public payer space, Medicare Advantage. In the Medicare Advantage space, I've highlighted here the top 10 funded so-called startups. It's so much money, it's hard to actually say startups at this point, but almost $21 billion have been invested in Medicare Advantage focused startups. It's like tech-enabled Medicare Advantage plans or tech-enabled risk-bearing primary care practices or tech-enabled blah, 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 but basically targeting the Medicare Advantage space. $21 billion. Medicaid, 1.5 billion. And that's scary, and here's why it's scary. In the Medicare Advantage market, oversimplifying here, but we basically have $340 billion market. That's about 46% of all Medicare spending. So it's not the Medicare fee-for-service, we're talking about MA. Medicaid is over $650 billion with a B dollar market. Enormous. Twice that of the MA market. How is it that there's 10 times more investment dollars going into MA? Well, there's a lot of variables. I highlight some of them here. Unit economics at face value for Medicare Advantage look more appealing, and I'll get to that in a couple of slides. Within Medicaid, reimbursement is lower. That is a fact. But there's also issues like institutional racism. There's biases against mental health. There's so many barriers that if entrepreneurs take one step past that and look at what is the TAM, the total addressable market at the bottom of the pyramid, the market is enormous and the social impact becomes enormous. I'll dig into some of these numbers in a second. Sorry for those of you that don't like looking at P&Ls. It may cross your eyes, but it is very relevant here. What I'll highlight for you is let's look at the columns of Medicare and Medicaid. So if you take an MA plan and you look at their revenue per month per beneficiary, $900 or so. Look at Medicaid beneficiaries, so non-duals, blind or disabled, age-blind or disabled category duals, but just run-of-the-mill Medicaid Benny. $900 versus $225 in monthly revenue. And then when you go down to the profit in serving those folks, it's a $45 per member per month profit, or it's a $7 per member per month profit. Initially, it may seem like, okay, MA is the place to go, or even better, duals is the place to go, which is actually a super interesting space. However, look at the number of Medicaid beneficiaries that have increased due to COVID. There's been literally a 20% increase in the number of Medicaid bennies. Now, there's going to be disenrollment because public health emergency however, there will be a plateauing and a much higher steady state than there was before. So the total addressable market, that bottom of the pyramid, has just gotten that much wider. Huge opportunity for investors, for social impact entrepreneurs, or just run-of-the-mill entrepreneurs that are trying to look for a really interesting place to create value. Another consideration is growth rates. The purple bar represents the individual or exchange space. Interesting growth, 4.8%. The blue column is actually negative growth rate. So commercial, this is where every single widget is being sold into, employer or the commercial space. It is easier to sell into that space, and unfortunately, because there's shiny object syndrome. Has anyone ever heard of shiny object syndrome? Right? The CEO heard that, oh, that cool mental health thing. Yeah, we got to buy this app. And zero evidence. In fact, there may be evidence of causing harm. Doesn't matter. Great salespeople will buy it. It's terrifying, actually. And we'll get to some equity ethics considerations in a little bit. And if we look at the green bar, which is Medicare Advantage, super interesting growth. And there is some evidence suggesting that Medicare Advantage truly does improve clinical outcomes. There's also other evidence suggests that Medicare Advantage carriers are not passing through the premium dollars. There's a lot of gaming, so mixed issue. But look at Medicaid. Really interesting growth, highly compromised patient population, really interesting opportunity to align both return on equity and but financial return on equity and social impact and clinical return. I don't want to completely discount the employer space because oftentimes the employer space is perceived as, oh, they're employed populations, they don't have issues around health equity, or oh, employed populations, they don't have to deal with social determinants of health issues. That is not correct. One of the first studies that's ever quantified this issue was Para and colleagues in 2020, last year, where they actually quantified in a large employed population health disparities and needs around social determinants of health. What this figure highlights is the red, which there isn't a lot of, is significant limitations to or kind of shortage areas. Orange is pretty severe, but not the worst. Gray, green are better. Look how much orange there is on this map. Right, this is an employer-insured population. That's pretty significant need. Put another way, food access, similar issue. Red is complete food desert, no access to healthy foods. Orange is moderate restriction or moderately limited access to healthy foods. Green is you've got Whole Foods around the corner everywhere you go. Look how much orange there is, pretty significant need. If you look at the percent of the population that searched for services, when you compare 400% of the federal poverty level versus less than 200% of the federal poverty level, so the blue bars, for the blue bars, there's a significant amount of emergency service utilization, needs around diabetes, needs around hypertension control, behavioral health needs, so on and so forth. So pretty meaningful disparities in income within an employer-insured population. And then some of the needs around access to services, mental health needs, maternity, EAP, which you're bucketing within behavioral health space. Telemedicine was characterized as a bucket, which I think you do telemedicine for all of the above. Diabetes, weight management. So pretty significant needs, and this is an employer-insured population. So, some of these are not necessarily SDOH issues, some of them squarely are SDOH issues. Now let's change gears a little bit and look where all the funding flows are happening. So this is a summary of funding through Q1 of this year, focused on digital health. I have the reference to the report here, and you can see how they define digital health. Generally, what you're seeing is in the light blue is the dollar amounts going into digital health investment. The dark blue is the number of deals. There's an exponential curve. Q1 of 2022 is almost on track to be similar to 2021. Either way, it's billions of dollars, right? Enormous dollar flows being invested in digital health. But what kind of digital health is actually getting created? What's being invented? What kind of services are coming out of this? Well, let's look at business models. So what this figure represents is the light gray bars are direct-to-consumer business models. This is going on Facebook, buying an ad for some app, and a consumer on Facebook clicks on the link, downloads the app, pays money for it. The dark blue is B2B and then D2C. So business to business, you sell to some organization like an insurer, and then that insurer maybe sells a solution directly to the consumer. And then the light green is business to business. So it's innovator selling to insurer, innovator selling to pharma, innovator selling to a provider. And what's starting to happen is there's an uptrend in the gray bars, more and more direct-to-consumer spending, or more and more, it's not actually spending, it's more and more direct-to-consumer focused business models. If you remember the pyramid, this is the top of the pyramid. More and more startups are focusing on the top of the pyramid. It's the opposite of where we need to be going. And fewer companies, the B2B and, well, mostly B2B, where the bottom of the pyramid, the folks don't necessarily have the cash to spend on an app, so some intermediary needs to be the one consuming or paying for this service or technology. Those revenue models or those business models are declining. So we're kind of going in the wrong direction if we're really trying to serve the bottom of the pyramid. This is a busy slide, but the thing I want to highlight is actually on the right side. This is a characterization of the conditions where there was the most fundraising in Q1 of 2022. And so mental health is the top, followed by oncology, cardiovascular, diabetes, reproductive, maternal health, primary care. Of course, primary care is at the bottom, which is sad, should be inverted. Mental health, I'm thrilled to see that investment in mental health is so high. But pair that with the preceding slide, it's increasing direct-to-consumer business model. So it's mental health serving the wealthier folks and not the bottom of the pyramid. And yet, there's an analysis that I did with a colleague of mine, Eric Crossland, and we published this a couple days ago. Caveat, it is not peer-reviewed, so take this with a grain of salt. But who here has heard of the Breakthrough Designation Program, Breakthrough Designated Device Program at the FDA, by raise of hands? Oh, okay. Very few people, maybe a couple hands. So essentially, FDA created this really interesting and productive program where if a device holds a lot of promise to cure disease or better diagnose disease, they get this expedited pathway to approval. Still the same rigor scientifically, it's just expedited. CMS, under the last administration, actually one of the few, I think, good things that came out of the last administration, came up with this rule where they tried to expedite the companies that got FDA approval through the Breakthrough Designated Device Program to actually also get coverage and reimbursement. This administration, while almost everything they've done has been fantastic from a healthcare perspective, I think decided they didn't want like a Trumpian era thing to exist. So squashed MCIT, which is the regulation that would have accelerated this process. And so they're inventing their own new one, TECT. The acronym really doesn't matter. What matters is they are considering recreating this program. And what Everett and I tried to identify is there actually a backlog of breakthrough designated devices that needs to be accelerated for coverage? And what we learned is, well, not exactly. So there are 325 breakthrough designated devices. 34 of them ended up getting approval or clearance. 2/3 of them are actually reimbursed. So there isn't that backlog. I mean, 1/3 haven't gotten reimbursed, but that's okay. CMS will process that. Of those breakthrough designated devices that got FDA approval or clearance, there's a specific category of devices called digital therapeutics. So instead of a patient being prescribed a pill, I could prescribe a patient a piece of software, just like I would prescribe a pill to manage their hypertension or their diabetes or their ADHD or their lots of really interesting conditions that could be managed. Only one digital therapeutic or diagnostic has actually received reimbursement from CMS. So we dug a little bit deeper. And what we identified is 95% of breakthrough designated devices that have received FDA approval or clearance got coverage. CMS understands and/or prioritizes and/or cares about somatic conditions and devices in that space. So if you address the heart or lungs or GI, really good chance that that device is going to get reimbursement. If you look at brain health, if you look at neurology or behavioral health issues, mental health or substance use disorder issues, only 1/3 of breakthrough designated devices received coverage and reimbursement. And this statistic isn't here, but it is in the reference. If you look at cardiology alone, 5 out of 5 breakthrough designated devices that got approved by the FDA got reimbursement by CMS. Interestingly, guess what kind of doctor specialization is most frequent at CMS? Any guesses? Cardiologists. They're everywhere. And they're great. They're awesome people. I know most of them. They're really talented folks. 0 out of 5 breakthrough designated devices that got FDA approval or clearance have reimbursement at CMS. Guess how many therapists there are working at CMS? Not a whole lot. And in fact, actually, there are some at CMMI and there are some at CMCS, the Medicaid program, but it's CM, the Center for Medicare, that makes these decisions, and they don't employ these folks. And so there is a condition level disparity in reimbursement in an administration that is supposedly all about closing health equity gaps. And I'm all about the White House, yay, but still, like, we got to call it out, right? Regardless of administration. So to the ethical principles, this isn't just about investing. This is what we as folks in the provider space and those of us for sure that are clinicians literally are obligated to abide by these ethical principles. And I would argue that investors and entrepreneurs should as well. So the principle of justice, so health equity, making sure that patients are treated fairly and the outcomes are equitably, fairly distributed across the population. Beneficence, our duty to produce benefit. If there's evidence for a technology that improves outcomes, it is our duty and should be CMS's duty to make sure that those technologies reach everyone fairly, and non-malfeasance. We can't have any more Theranos. We can't have any more snake oil. Well, it's unethical, but also terrible for the industry. Having said all these ethical principles, here are my assumptions and observations as an investor. Investors do not care about ethical principles, even the good ones. Like my peers and colleagues that I invest with, I am not banking that they're going to go for the ethical angle in investing. What they do incredibly well is they are profit optimizers. My hope and bet is if we can show that they can profit optimize by investing in the bottom of the pyramid, they will optimize for that variable and they will get more profit, and they will happen to also create social impact and close health equity gaps. So I've been targeting this thesis, and average, to oversimplify, the average returns are a pretty common metric in investing. In internal rate of return is about 30% or higher. So stock market average over a long time roughly will give you 5 to 6% returns. Venture investors, if they do a really good job, will get 30% or more, typically over a 10-year time frame. And I'll get back to you guys how my fund is performing, but my hope is after this decade, those investors with much bigger checks that they can write will sniff out these best practices, which I'll highlight in a moment, and start investing this way and start investing in the bottom of the pyramid. And then we get a virtuous cycle of innovation, closing health equity gaps, and then let the investors make their money, whatever, good for them, but as long as it's done in the right way. All right, what are these best practices? So one, invest in evidence early. This will make companies more money. Unfortunately, an analysis that I did with a couple of my mentees that was funded by the California Healthcare Foundation, we looked at solutions serving the dual space specifically. So there's some constraints here in terms of generalizability to all digital health. But looking at solutions in the dual space, there are very few, less than 5%, that had a randomized control trial to prove the marketing claims that they're stating on their website, or more than one non-randomized control trial, like prospective cohort, retrospective cohort study. Vast majority did not have any high quality evidence to support their marketing claims. And yet on their outcome section on the website, we reduced blood pressure by X, we improve hemoglobin A1C by Y. No evidence. That's a problem. And actually there's consistent with the prior study I did with friends at Institute for Healthcare Improvement at almost a decade prior, which also showed that at best, companies had emerging evidence as opposed to any really rigorous evidence. Some examples of companies that do have evidence, and this is where take everything I say with a grain of salt, or better yet, go actually read these studies. So a company called Applied VR I invested in, I think 4 years ago now, virtual reality headset that bakes in cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness exercises, deep breathing exercises, and has 5 randomized controlled trials demonstrating reductions in acute pain, and they have a recent randomized controlled trial showing reductions in chronic back pain. All the studies are on their website. Pretty exciting, non-pharmacologic, opioid sparing, pretty interesting way to not have to get folks develop opioid use disorder while still addressing their pain. Another company, I'm a pediatrician, so I'm a little biased, is a company called Akili that created a technology called EndeavorRx, also FDA approved. And they essentially created a game, it's oversimplifying dramatically, but a game that kids will play that will address their attentiveness and take advantage of neuroplasticity of kids' brains to rewire their brains so that the kids can become more attentive by playing essentially a game. So I could write a prescription essentially for an app that will help kids address their ADD, be more attentive to school, and I won't have to be worried about, oh, are they going to get sleep because I just wrote them a stimulant? Oh, are they going to lose weight because I just wrote them a stimulant? Or is there going to be diversion because I just wrote a stimulant? Can you imagine like software can do this? Well, you don't have to imagine. The studies are there. They have some really cool data. I told you guys move up to the front. Now, again, this is all available. The point here is just show you how many studies there are. Now, I'm not an investor in this company. I wish I was. It ended up getting acquired by ResMed. I just love their science. So it was a technology called Propeller Health, and they created a device that attaches to the end of an inhaler, and when kids with asthma or adults with asthma or COPD are escalating in their use or just non-adhering with their use, either of their controller medication or over-escalating with their rescue inhaler, there's a notification that's sent to a care team. Care team descends upon the patient, makes sure that they get whatever they need or alleviates the trigger so as not to go to the ED. They have 43 studies demonstrating impact. Not all randomized controlled trials, but they do have several RCTs. And think of the level of investment by the original investors that it took. I mean, it was bravery, frankly, to do this way back when, but also ended up panning out pretty well for them. They had great outcomes. They're getting good commercial traction. They ended up getting acquired. So there's really good alignment, evidence-based practice, improving clinical outcomes, financial returns for investors. Another company, which I'm particularly excited also, a company called Cognoa that created a device or a technology called Canvas DX, which can diagnose autism within 30 minutes. So by raise of hands, who's ever either managed autism or had to interact with a family member or friend dealing with autism? Okay, it's a lot of people, 60% or so of us. Right now, as a pediatrician, if I have a kiddo that I would do an MCHAT or some screening tool that says, ding, 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 this kiddo may be at risk or may have autism spectrum disorder, I refer to a behavioral specialist. It'll take 6 months, sometimes 12 months for that kid to actually be seen. That is 6 to 12 months of the most imprintable, intervenable time to actually treat the kiddo, and in some cases, get them to a level of functioning where they actually lose the diagnosis. If you are a Black kid, your time to getting evaluated and diagnosed is twice as long as if you're a white kid. Constantino et al. In September 2020 of Pediatrics proved this, showed this, quantified institutional racism in diagnosing autism. Why do we have to wait 12 months or 18 months or longer if you're a Black kid when within a day your primary care pediatrician can write you a prescription for a piece of software that your parent downloads? Bandwidth issues aside, we'll talk about that in Wi-Fi, but downloads an app and you get a diagnosis within the same day or the next couple of days, and boom, you're in treatment, closing health equity gaps in a magnificent way. Again, this is available in PDF form. This actually is a poster from a presentation we did in American Academy of Pediatrics, but in Nature, so Nature General Medicine, they accepted our study. It's going to be published in the next couple of weeks. The thing I want to draw your attention to when you can actually see this in PDF form is the results section. And what this shows is compared to a human diagnostician, there is comparable performance in being able to diagnose autism. Great, the thing works. What's different though, is humans have significant disparities in how they diagnose based on race and ethnicity. So much worse diagnostic ability if you're a non-white race. The technology is coded to be anti-racist. We've quantified this. So AI gets a lot of flack because AI, crap data in or racist data in, racist data out. This was a deliberate effort to make AI inputs diverse and representative so the outputs are diverse and representative. Think about that. I get so excited to think of like anti-racist AI. Shifting gears a little bit, so back to adults. There's a company I invested in called Monument. They're a telehealth provider of alcohol use disorder treatment services. Evidence-based practice, everything from physician prescribing naltrexone to a therapist doing psychotherapy to peers doing peer services. What's really interesting is when we compare HEDIS measures to national averages, which is represented by the gray bars, to Monument's initiation and engagement measures, which is the green bars. The middle bar, or the tallest green bar, is showing about a 93% initiation rate relative national averages of mid-30s, low 40s. And on the right is engagement in treatment a month out. So about 70% that are still engaged in treatment a month out, whereas we have like high single digits or low teens as a national average. That's a big deal when you're talking about a key metric of success for treating any substance use disorder is just, are they retained in treatment? Are they still showing up, or are they still getting benefit from treatment? So super excited about that. That is being presented at the American Telemedicine Association conference next week as a poster presentation. And then a whole different disease state, looking at using SDOH interventions to address diabetes. So there's a company I invested in called Inquisit Health. Group of, it's a virtual network of peers. So this is super low tech. I mean, their technology is great because elegant, great video, great audio, great text, great QA, but basically it's peers. It's people who come from a community that have a shared background with the patient, that have the same chronic condition, but have that chronic condition controlled. And so what this study, and this is a JAMIA study, published last year in February, it basically quantified all the interventions that are diabetes or educational lifestyle specific. That's the first column. They quantified all the SDOH interventions. And then on the next slide, they actually quantified pre-post cohort analysis hemoglobin A1C reduction, 1.7. That is a significant, not just statistically, clinically significant reduction in hemoglobin A1C through a peer intervention. Essentially, they've digitized a lot of the literature on community health workers, which is quite robust as well. Evidence, evidence, evidence. I hope everyone gets the point. Invest early in evidence. Hold these startups accountable for the evidence. If they don't have evidence, say, hey, thanks for showing me your cool marketing spiel, but now go develop some evidence and come back. Another very important promising practice. So Blue Cloud is a company, not tech at all. It's pure services. It's ambulatory surgical centers for complex care pediatric patients that need dental services. A mouthful. Okay. But essentially, it's a community-based intervention where kids don't have to go to a hospital to get general anesthesia to get dental work, because these are kids with intellectual or developmental disabilities or metabolic issues, where you're just not going to do routine dental work on these kids without general anesthesia. Not safe for the provider, not safe for the kiddo. So they could either go to a hospital where there's a $10,000 facility fee for Medicaid, for the same surgeons and anesthesiologists as going to a community ambulatory surgical center, same quality of care, but in the community right next to where they live, and all the staff, ancillary staff and so on, are also from that community, speak the same language, but only a $1,000 facility fee. $10,000 facility fee for hospital, where are you, doctor? $1,000 facility fee, ambulatory surgical centers, similar outcomes. So taxpayers win, state Medicaid wins, the kids win. So this company has been doing great. We actually sold this company in January, great financial returns. But here's what is so unique about this company. During COVID, and actually even before COVID, I won't name the name, but there was an insurer in Florida that refused to pay for treatment for these kids. So we ended up treating over 250 kids, many of which could have died because of dental problems progressing to dental abscesses, progressive brain abscesses, just awfulness, totally preventable. But we chose to spend the money, the company's own resources, to do the right thing for the kids. And the board was getting antsy. They're like, we're sitting on $1 million of accounts receivable. We can't keep treating these kids. And I said, we have to. It's our obligation as providers. They agreed, and good on them. Norwest Venture Partners, one of the few private equity firms I trust to do the right thing. And I ended up going to the state Medicaid director, Beth Kidder, who was lovely. And I said, Beth, here are the numbers. Here's 250 of your Medicaid bennies. Most of them are non-English speaking. Here's the payer. They're not paying. What do you think we should do? Next day, kicked off an audit. Within a month, we got $1 million wire. And so this is one of those rare examples where private equity profit optimizers, when they're shown, actually, you're potentially going to make more money, or just at least some kind of money doing the right thing, they will listen. And what's interesting is then Beth talked to all of her other state Medicaid director friends, and then all those folks started to say, okay, we want ethically driven, clinical outcomes driven providers. And then boom, business started to ramp up. And so now this private equity firm loves investing in Medicaid businesses because they see if you do, clinically focused, evidence-based, long-term outlook, you're going to make pretty good returns. Another, and probably the most important success factor that I've seen, is diversifying who we invest in. This is just a sample of some of the founders I've invested in. And I have a simple rule of thumb, which is just investing in folks that don't look like me and or don't come from the same background as I do. And I'll quantify some of those statistics in a bit, but it has been turning out to work out really well. There's so much literature already in management science, how in large organizations, the approach to diversifying in leadership leads to higher financial results. There isn't as much literature in the startup space, but at least anecdotally, this is working out beautifully. If anyone is looking to hire folks, diverse healthcare leaders, my friend and colleague Andre Blackman runs a recruiting firm that specializes in that, so give him a shout. And then one of the final best practices I want to highlight is deeply understanding the customer. So this is back to that dual study I referenced earlier. When we looked at the primary end user of the service or technology that innovators were going after, what we found was a massive disconnect. So first of all, 64.3% of the solutions were targeting the consumer. Fair enough. Someone who is dually eligible could benefit from an app, maybe not. Should it be 64% of the population, or 64% of the solutions that's the primary end user? Probably not. What's the most stark disconnect is, look at the orange yellowish sliver, non-medical provider. That's home care. That's home delivered meals. That's the functional support. So so much of supporting duals is home and community-based services. And the fact that less than 4% of solutions are targeting HCBS to work with or sell into, that's a massive market disconnect and a market failure. What's even more concerning is this is a look at not the primary end user of the service or the technology, but the primary financial customer, like the entity that is expected to pay. And what we found was consumers were expected to pay 21% of these for 21% of these solutions. By definition, these consumers can't pay. They're dually eligible. They don't have the resources, discretionary spending for some expensive out-of-pocket service. So the market, investors and entrepreneurs, fundamentally don't understand duals, and I think we can probably extrapolate that to the Medicaid space. So back to the whole $21 billion investment in Medicare Advantage and less than $2 billion investment in the Medicaid space. One of my portfolio companies did something super interesting to try to embody this whole understanding the customer best practice. They had a payer tell them, it was a regional payer in the Pacific Northwest, that said, we don't have child and adolescent behavioral health needs. We're good. Network is solid. Speech therapists, we got them covered. No worries. And this company provides virtual behavioral health services for kids and adolescents, virtual speech therapy for kids and adolescents. They came back to me, they're like, payer XYZ said this, what do you think? I was like, I know for a fact that's BS, but you know what? Let's prove it to them. So they did a secret shopper study. They went on that payer's directory with all those so-called providers that are alive, many of whom were actually not living. And they tried to quantify like who's actually available. And so what they found was only 42% of the speech therapists, occupational therapists, and behavioral health therapists treat children under 14 years old. This is a pediatric directory. Wrong, disconnect. Only 31% of providers that treat children are currently accepting new patients. That's a problem. Only 10% of the providers can actually provide the services, and when they do, the wait time were 79 days for occupational therapists, 97 days for a speech therapist, and over a month for a behavioral health therapist. So 2 months ago when I was on service, I had 6 kids in the ED that attempted suicide. I had to find beds for them because we stabilize, get them treatment. Can you imagine being a parent and having a child who is having a serious acute issue and going to a directory and calling, frantically calling while your child is having these issues, while you probably also have to work and be on a Zoom call, while you may have an adult parent who may have like dementia. Like, this is cruel. It's just straight up cruel. It's frankly, the ethical principles, this is talking about non-malfeasance. This is it. 14% of the providers were outside of a 100-mile search radius. 12% of providers had a disconnected or incorrect phone number. I mean, these directors are BS. Providers are drinking their own Kool-Aid to the detriment of our children, and frankly, adults as well, but it's terrifying. And finally, speaking of also of walking the talk, when I ran the methadone clinics a while back, I had, let's just say, some challenges with my board. They didn't understand what homelessness was or housing insecurity, and I had to do some convincing to help them understand that if we better cater to populations with housing insecurity, we can improve their outcomes, we could drive up revenue. They're like, yeah, no, just keep doing what you're doing. And so I spent a 24-hour period being homeless in Baltimore. Now, being homeless, I knew I was going to be not homeless in 24 hours. So like the whole anxiety of not knowing where your next meal is going to be, that I didn't even feel that. Majority of the population with homelessness has SMI. So like, obviously this is not a truly representative experience, but I have to say it was terrifying. And I wrote a blog post about it. The link is right there. And took some photos. No toilet paper. The bed, that's a bed that my colleague John, God bless him, he's an investor, and I literally put out on Twitter, like, I'm going to be homeless for 24 hours. Investors, they want to like be real in so-called investing in the Medicaid space, come join me. He joined me. He ended up getting bed bugs, no doors, no privacy. Now, there was a roof. And the windows were all open. There was no heating, so it was freezing, but at least there was a roof. Like, it was something. And eventually, John and I looked at each other like 4 o'clock in the morning, and we're like, you ready to tap out? I'm ready to tap out. Go. Called our Ubers and got breakfast. Like, we couldn't handle anymore. And that's just like people's lives. So key takeaway we learned was about a third of my patients had to make a choice. Either get in line around noon to get shelter or go get dosed for methadone. And if they could just go get in line for shelter and buy heroin, which is actually entirely carfentanil in Baltimore, that's the thing they'll do. And what we ended up doing is just changing the timing of our groups. And we did some contingency management where if you need to participate in group, in order to participate in group, you need to have, in order to get methadone dosing, you need to have some level of participation in group, although we actually modified that so that people who just wanted to get dosed, they got dosed. But we had dramatic increase in people getting their methadone. We had a dramatic increase in group participation. Our revenue went through the roof, and people still could get into their housing in line for housing. Separately, we ended up investing in buying 3 buildings to house people, but that was like a drop in the bucket given the volume. But huge learnings, and it was sad I had to convince my board this way. But I encourage all boards to go like live with the population, live in the shoes of, even though it's not truly representative, walk in the shoes of folks that you're trying to serve, and it will be eye-opening. I wish all investors did that. Finally, back to Inquisit Health, the solution that lowered hemoglobin A1C levels. One of the things I found most impactful as a best practice is that software alone is really not going to do anything particularly interesting unless it's like revenue cycle management, like pure back-end stuff. If it's patient-facing, population health, care coordination, clinical care, without trust, without a human interaction, you can't get trust. Without trust, you're not going to get behavior change. Without behavior change, you're not going to improve outcomes. And Inquisit embodies that beautifully because the entire intervention, almost entirely, is a trust-based peer-to-peer intervention. Final promising practice. All these innovators are going to payers, or all these entrepreneurs are going to payers and saying, hey, we want a cool new contract, make us your preferred provider, we want to go at risk, give us a guaranteed PMPM, whatever. Put a pause on that, or don't even do that until you get in network and just get referrals from primary care and help primary care offload the specialty stuff that they can't or don't want to do and provide the service and actually generate the claims data to show what you're purporting to do with your marketing. it is such a simple tweak, but I found that my companies are so much more successful in just getting street credibility, where they actually start providing services in the community and working with primary care to support them instead of trying to boil the ocean and get all these fancy contracts. Although value-based payment obviously is the way everything needs to go, but you got to start somewhere. .com has done this in a great way. Monument has done this in a great way. And finally, this is for all of us. Telehealth cliff is bad. PHE got extended, fine. We get a little reprieve, but it is common, especially in the public payer space. Medicare, Medicaid, we have to advocate. There's legislative vehicles out there. We just need to get the momentum to do it. If you need any suggestions, give me a holler afterwards. I wrote an article on it. It's really straightforward. We just need to mobilize. All right, finally, I've told you all these things, supposedly best practices. Let me tell you how it's been working out. I made 28 investments to date. 16 of them, or 57% of the founding teams, are non-white, non-heteronormative, and or non-male. So there's some real diversity. 12 or 43% of the companies raised their first institutional round since I got involved. And it is so sad. It's such a sad state of affairs. Great for me, sad for society and all these other investors, where investment committees, if they have a first-time Black female founder, they have to go through an extra level of like, are we sure she can do this? Like, what are you doing? I'm very fortunate that I've built enough trust with my colleagues that I get referred these incredible founders, and I'm typically first money in, and as I'll get to, they are performing incredibly, incredibly well. And now finally, these, traditionally straight, older white male run funds are sniffing out the opportunity, but whatever it takes them to get involved, that's fine. Sold or had some kind of M&A activity with 4 of the companies, so 11% exit or hit rate. Internal rate of return, remember that 30% I referenced? That's like winning. 56% internal rate of return. Investing in diversity, investing in evidence, investing in understanding and empathizing with the customer base. Put another way, return on equity, 486%. So all this, like all these CEO letters about diversity and all the kind of, tweeting out about DEI efforts where there's a chief diversity officer that gets 0 budget, 0 staff. Like, no, that's not how it works. Substantive investment in diversity will make you money. Hard stop. Conveniently, it also leads to empathy, great hustle from entrepreneurs, and a very unique opportunity to serve the bottom of the pyramid. Quick note, I've broadened this thesis to art, so I've been investing in a bunch of artists, have made 0 money on it because I don't know what I'm doing, but it looks beautiful. And I will say, one of the artists, Eric Wesley, just got into the Whitney, which is incredible, where I met the Red Hot Chili Peppers, different story. I've also extended this to housing, so low-income housing, where not jacking up the rents, still making a profit, supporting folks by plugging them into community-based organizations for mental health services, jobs counseling, whatever they need. Everyone has re-upped their leases, eventually pay, and it's profitable. So this whole thesis of investing in the bottom of the pyramid, folks can make really good returns, and I think applied to healthcare is a really fun way to spend time. So with that, thank you guys so much. We'll have a Q&A a little later today, but I think we have 5 minutes for some questions, or should we? Yeah, all right, let's do it. So thank you guys. Any questions?
So those in the room, if you have questions, can use the mic so that the virtual audience can hear us. And then Jason, if you can pop the virtual questions up on the board as well so that we don't miss that opportunity.
Any questions or comments?
I'll be brave.
Hi.
Dr. Ostrowski, Karen Ruban, University of Virginia. I'm a pediatrician and a cardiologist.
Great to see you.
Hopefully
Hi.
I'm still, and we're glad you're here. The work is incredible, and we miss you at the federal level, certainly, but we're so glad
Thank
you're
you.
gathering evidence that can ultimately maybe change some of these paradigms. I'm curious, for those of us who are providers and systems, it's very challenging when we have different payers who are covering different services, certainly in the fee-for-service environment. And I'm seeking your advice about how we best manage things such as for example, e-consults. So
Mhm.
e-consults covered by Medicare for Medicare
Mhm.
and most of the commercial plans, but for Medicaid, what we've been told by Virginia Medicaid, and we love Virginia Medicaid, let me just say, they are fantastic, is
Mhm.
that national federal Medicaid says, sorry, we're not going to give you the matching funds for e-consults. How do we circumvent this? What do we do besides evidence?
A great question. Thank you. Let's chat in greater depth and mobilize a little bit and chat with the state Medicaid director to clarify, or whomever is your point of contact, because the excuse of saying the feds won't pay for it is completely inaccurate. The singular thing that the National Medicaid program statutorily can't pay for is housing directly, but LA is doing it just on the DL. Like there's nothing that Medicaid federally is prohibited from paying for statutorily, except a few very, very rare things. Everything else is a go if the state asks for it. And the feds are almost never going to categorically say no to the states. They may push back, but the last administration, again, terrible, but they did redefine what gets allowed. I mean, I had at one point, Governor, if you can call him that, Governor Scott Walker proposed drug testing as a prerequisite for Medicaid eligibility. And I had to raise my hand and be like, I scribbled them. I did some quick math. I was like, yeah, that'd kill about 10,000 people a year. Verma still pushed it. And we had to finally get general counsel to say, yeah, that's actually illegal. Almost anything could get through. Now, nefarious and virtuous, but that's not even a gray area. What you're describing is completely allowable. It takes a little political mobilization. And state Medicaid will listen to provider groups. I mean, they get scared if a critical mass of providers are going to speak up. So if you need help mobilizing, let me know.
I will, and thank you. And for your bravery, because we know in the previous administration, you were incredible. So
I appreciate
thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. I want to make sure we stay on time. So should we wrap it up? Oh, all right, one more. Okay. Any other questions, comments? I'm happy to take them offline as well. Is there one more? Yep. All right. Let's do it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve North from North Carolina. And in regards to Karen's comment, the Healthy Opportunities Program in North Carolina with our Medicaid transformation is a place where Medicaid dollars are going to go to human service organizations in food, housing, transportation, and interpersonal violence. So I think that this is a model that can be looked at across the country as a way to move that money. The managed care entities are a little not quite sure how they're going to pay a food pantry for the services they provide.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some work that we still need to do, but it's going to be a really interesting experiment to watch.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think it's a great model to mirror. Cool. I think we're up on time, so I'll stick around. Also, we have Q&A later. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Hey, it's awesome to hear someone who's passionate about health equity, and it is something that we are pondering for the theme for next year's conference, so stay tuned. So we have a quick break, and then we're going into state meetings, and this ending discussion about policy is exactly why we're having these state meetings. So for those of you who are new to the Matrix conference, we set aside a time each year for states to gather together, and the focus of the state meetings is really to talk about what's going on at the policy level in your state. Where are maybe some things that have happened with COVID that have improved telehealth and increased adoption? And then what happens when the public health emergency ends, and how we're transitioning from temporary emergency policies to permanent policies, and then how your state can really come together to really advocate and educate about what is needed to really bring access to care and equitable care for populations. So I hope that if you are in one of the Matrix states, that you will join your state meeting. This is our first time doing it hybrid. It's going to be, I don't even know how it's going to go, but we're trying to bridge the virtual audience with the in-person audience. And again, we are at like hybrid 1.0 beta. So we'll see how this goes. But I'd love to just, engage in that discussion, because I think this is really timely time to get those things on the table. And then part of that last part of that discussion is, how can Matrix help you? we know that policy challenges are going to continue for a while, even though we've made a lot of headway through the pandemic. And so we would love to know, are there some things that we can do to support your states to really have strong policies that will not increase the equity and disparity gap because of these policies, but also help us as we innovate around the telehealth space. So there's a short break, and then please join your state meeting if you're part of the Matrix states. All right, thanks.